At precisely 3:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by a piercing alarm, the screech of tires, and the blinding flicker of red and blue lights reflecting off my bedroom walls. Disoriented, I stumbled to the window, my pulse racing, only to witness a scene that could have been ripped from a blockbuster movie. Armed officers swarmed the street with disciplined precision, issuing sharp commands through their radios. But that wasn't the most astonishing part. What truly stunned me was the absence of my Jeep, the same one-eyed meticulously locked and parked in front of my house, following explicit instructions from the local police task force. In its place stood a bright orange parking cone with a sticky note attached, reading, Code V violation. HOA confiscated. I was torn between disbelief, frustration, and a dark urge to laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. Margaret, the HOA president, had somehow cut the lock off a law enforcement vehicle and had it towed away as if it were a discarded couch. She had no idea she just obliterated a months-long surveillance operation. And now, with federal agents standing outside demanding to know where my Jeep had gone, I faced a chilling realization. I had to explain to the government that my vehicle had been stolen not by a criminal, but by a neighborhood busybody. Moving into Maple Grove Estates was meant to be a new beginning. After years of military service abroad and drifting between cities, I craved stability, a quiet home with a yard for my dog and a garage spacious enough to tinker with motorcycles. For the first few weeks, it was idyllic. Neighbors greeted me warmly, children played in the cul-de-sac, and the air carried the scent of grilled burgers and fresh mulch. But that peace, I soon discovered, had a formidable adversary, Margaret Hensley, the HOA president, known locally as the Queen of Compliance. She didn't just enforce rules, she embodied them. Grass half an inch too long? Expect a fine. Christmas lights lingering past New Year's? A stern warning would follow. And if you owned a rugged black Jeep with military-grade blackout plating and reinforced bumpers, like mine, you were apparently a public menace. The first time Margaret laid eyes on my Jeep, her lips pursed so tightly they nearly disappeared. "That doesn't belong here," she declared, eyeing it as though it had personally offended her. "It looks like it rolled out of a war zone." I explained, calmly, that it was tied to my consulting work with local law enforcement. She scoffed, "Nice tale, Captain. Next time, get a sedan like everyone else." From then on, she fixated on it, bombarding me with weekly letters citing unauthorized vehicle modifications, excessive ruggedness, and my favorite, parking aggression. Who knew a stationary Jeep could wage psychological warfare? What Margaret didn't grasp, too preoccupied with HOA regulations to notice the world around her, was that my Jeep had recently been fitted with covert surveillance gear. A task force had recruited me to use it as a stationary observation point for a sting operation targeting a drug ring infiltrating our supposedly serene suburb. Equipped with hidden cameras, GPS trackers, and a digital recorder, it was essentially a mobile command center. Its tough exterior, ironically the very thing Margaret despised, made it ideal for blending in without arousing suspicion. I kept the operation under wraps, adhering strictly to the task force's directives: park it out front, adjust its position slightly every few days, and never move it without prior notice. To deter theft and signal its importance, I secured it with a heavy-duty wheel lock. That, apparently, was Margaret's breaking point. The lock seemed to ignite her authoritarian streak. She reported the Jeep 5 times, escalating her grievances to abandoned vehicle status despite my repeated assurances it was neither abandoned nor illegally parked. Then, one afternoon while I was out, she took action. Margaret hired a shady tow service that clearly didn't bother with paperwork or questions. Before they arrived, she strode up to the Jeep, bolt cutters in hand, and snapped the lock off as if she were cracking a safe. My neighbor Tom, a retiree who practically lived on his porch with his security camera rolling nonstop, captured it all. In the footage, she smirks at the lens after cutting the lock and quips, "One less blight to deal with." By the time I returned, the Jeep was gone. Initially, I feared theft until I spotted the cone and note. I confronted Margaret at her door, but she refused to open it, instead firing off an email claiming the HOA had relocated the non-compliant vehicle to uphold community standards. It was so absurd I chuckled until I remembered the sensitive equipment inside. I contacted the task force immediately. They didn't find it funny. Within half an hour, officers were at my doorstep, demanding a full account. When I showed them Tom's video, Officer Ramirez's face went pale. She cut the lock and towed it without permission, he asked, voice tight. I nodded, already dreading the fallout. That's tampering with federal property obstruction at the very least. The mood turned grim. They issued an urgent retrieval order, but the Jeep wasn't at any local tow yard. Margaret had stashed it somewhere off the grid, likely illegally. Worse, the sting operation it was monitoring collapsed, suspects scattered, months of work undone by an HOA zealot with a grudge against my Jeep. That's how I ended up on my porch at 3:17 a.m., watching a task force scramble without its key asset, officers fuming, and Margaret nowhere in sight. She had no inkling of the havoc she'd unleashed, but the law was coming for her and she'd soon regret more than just her lawn complaints. The next morning, a terse text from Officer Ramirez read, "We found the Jeep. You need to see this." My stomach churned. I barely had time to grab a jacket before he arrived in an unmarked SUV, jaw clenched, silent the whole drive. 10 minutes later, we pulled up to a rusty gate behind an HOA maintenance shed I'd never noticed. Ramirez pointed to the open padlock dangling from the gate. Inside was a weed-choked lot littered with cones, tarps, and 3 other cars, each with faded tickets flapping on their windshields. And there was my Jeep, scratched, mud-streaked, and dumped at an odd angle. The driver's side mirror was shattered, and the surveillance case was pried open, its contents gutted. I stood speechless as Ramirez muttered curses and snapped photos. "This isn't a tow lot," he growled, kicking a cone. "It's an HOA junkyard. She's running her own impound scam out of a shed." The damage was stark scuff marks, mud-caked suspension, and a glove box mangled by a screwdriver. Ramirez called for backup and a federal HOA team. Then, as if on cue, Margaret appeared, heels clicking through the gravel, chipper as if she'd just found a lost kitten. "Oh, good, you found it," she chirped. "I was about to notify you, assumed you knew the HOA had the right to." Ramirez cut her off. "Ma'am, step back from the vehicle." She blinked, thrown by his tone. "Excuse me? I'm the HOA president. I can remove unauthorized vehicles. You removed federal property from an active operation," he snapped. "Do you realize how serious that is?" Margaret's expression morphed from smug to incredulous. "You're joking. That thing was an eyesore, locked up, unmoved for days. I did everyone a favor." I couldn't believe her gall. She expected gratitude. Ramirez signaled an officer to escort her away as the team inspected the Jeep. She didn't go quietly, ranting about saving the neighborhood from blight. Every word tightened the noose around her. Later, Ramirez asked if I had footage of the towing. I showed him Tom's video, Margaret slicing the lock in broad daylight, laughing as an unmarked tow truck hauled the Jeep away. It was damning. By day's end, the task force had an airtight case, video proof, a timeline, and an illegal impound lot masquerading as HOA enforcement. But the absurdity peaked when Tom sauntered over with a lawn chair and a soda, grinning. "So, you telling her she screwed the feds, or should I post it online?" Turns out, Tom had documented everything: Margaret's letters, her tirades at meetings, her gloating on the community Facebook group about cleaning up the streets. He handed over a trove of evidence like it was a gift basket. "Knew she'd crash eventually," he said. "Didn't think she'd do it by jacking a government Jeep." The HOA itself was oblivious. Margaret had acted solo, bypassing votes, paperwork, and notices. When word spread, residents were stunned, some quietly thrilled. One even brought cupcakes with tow truck icing. That night, Detective Emily Carter, the task force lead, called. Her voice was steady but sharp. "We're weighing charges: tampering, obstruction, maybe more. Her HOA title won't shield her." I asked what came next. "We'll process the damage, review the footage, then it's the DA's call. Brace yourself, she won't go down quietly." She was right. The next day, Margaret announced an emergency HOA meeting, not to apologize, but to defend herself, claiming misunderstandings and federal overreach. The nerve was staggering. She was digging in, oblivious to the evidence stacking against her. Friday's meeting would be her reckoning, not as the gavel wielder, but as the accused, facing neighbors, lawyers, and a storm of subpoenas. The community center was packed that Friday: residents, reporters, and stern-faced suits who weren't there for snacks. Tension crackled as we awaited Margaret Hensley, once the HOA's iron fist. She arrived late, in a garish red blazer, clutching a clipboard like a shield, her smile smug as she tapped the mic. "Thank you for attending," she began, voice saccharine. I'm here to clarify the recent confusion over an illegally parked, unregistered vehicle. There's been hysteria and misinformation. Someone likely Tom snorted. Margaret pressed on. As president, I prioritize safety and aesthetics. That abandoned Jeep, chained and unmoved, required action. I had no knowledge of covert operations or government ownership. I was misled. I stood. Misled? You cut the lock off a federal vehicle, towed it, and bragged online. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She glared, but I pressed forward, handing a USB drive to the IT tech. The screen lit up with Tom's footage, Margaret slicing the lock, directing the tow, laughing then her Facebook posts, mocking military toys, and boasting about cleaning the streets. Silence fell. A board member, Phil, whispered nervously to his neighbor. Margaret's composure cracked. Perhaps I was misinformed, she stammered, but it violated HOA rules, and I had authority. No, you didn't, Detective Carter interjected, stepping forward with a folder. You bypassed the board, used an unlicensed tow service, and hid the vehicle illegally. You compromised a task force operation. Gasps erupted. Margaret turned to the board, but they shrank back. Phil stood. I moved to suspend Margaret Hensley as president pending investigation. Seconded. Another chimed. All in favor. A unanimous I rang out. Margaret gaped. You can't do this. I built this HOA and wrecked it in a day. I shot back. Desperate, she waved a letter. This cease and desist from my attorney proves entrapment and defamation. Carter skimmed it. Trent Maxwell? He's under scrutiny himself. Good luck. Margaret's allies sat mute. Tom whispered, she's toast. She stormed out, vowing, this isn't over. The room erupted in applause. A tyrant dethroned. Carter murmured, charges are coming. She's not escaping this. For the first time in months, Maple Grove exhaled. Within 48 hours, the story exploded. Tom posted the footage on Reddit's r/entitled people, captioned, HOA Margaret jacks my neighbor's Jeep, didn't know it was federal. It hit the front page fast, racking up millions of views. TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter turned Margaret into a memeable villain, her press conference remixed into a rap, her face plastered on Grand Theft Auto edits. News vans descended, and tourists snapped selfies with my scratched-up Jeep, now a local icon. A parody GoFundMe, Save the Tactical Jeep, funded a matte black repaint. Beneath the humor, though, the stakes remained high. The ruined surveillance gear derailed police work, and Margaret wasn't done. She resurfaced at the courthouse with Trent Maxwell, a sleazy lawyer with a penchant for frivolous suits, claiming why Tim who'd blaming the police, the HOA, and me for baiting her. The DA hit back with charges, tampering, obstruction, and property destruction. Her countersuit alleging I'd lured her into crime by parking legally was laughed out of court. Online, Margaret became a punchline, her name shorthand for petty tyranny. Meanwhile, the neighborhood bloomed, porches filled with chairs, kids drew on sidewalks, rules faded. Tom launched HOAWatchdog.net, a resource for HOA victims featuring our saga and Team Jeep merch. The task force gifted me an upgraded Jeep, a thank you for enduring the chaos. Then an audit revealed Margaret's years of embezzlement, HOA funds squandered on towing and personal perks. Another investigation loomed. Phil mused, without the HOA, maybe we're just neighbors again. That hit home. One woman's control fetish had unraveled, it all exposed by a Jeep she couldn't stand. The end came quietly. One Saturday, marshals arrived, arresting Margaret on a slew of charges: obstruction, tampering, embezzlement. She went silently, disbelief etched on her face, clutching a useless folder. The neighborhood cheer, fireworks popped, the HOA dissolved, and residents reclaimed their freedom. The task force later gave me the shed Karen's old impound lot, now a community garage, christened with a Jeep parade. Margaret took a plea. No jail, but fines and a 20-year HOA ban. She vanished, her house sold in the night. Maple Grove thrived: barbecues, colorful mailboxes, and my Jeep, parked proudly, a symbol of defiance and a hell of a tale.